So, hi, I'm Ruth Somalo, one of the featured programmers for Doc NYC, and it's my great pleasure to have Noah Hutton, the director of In Silico, with us for a Q&A. Hello, Noah. How are you?
Good, Ruth. Thank you so much for doing this. It's nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. So this is, at Doc NYC, we really love like science films, but this is the nerdiest film I think we've ever had. And I have you to thank you. I have to thank you so much for like guiding me through this neuroscientist, hardcore issue. Tell us a little bit about, because this is a hugely passion project for you. You've been on it 10 years plus. Tell us what happened in your brain to fall in love with this subject and wanted to do this for this long. And then we'll go into more details.
Yeah, the genesis of it was when I personally got into neuroscience in college. And the thing that hooked me, I think, people get into getting interested in this field for different reasons, but the thing that got me was a book called Why God Won't Go Away. It was about studying the brains of some of the most religious people in the world, meditating monks and priests, and seeing what they have in common in terms of brain activity at their peak spiritual moments. So that was an aha moment for me that, oh, there's something correlated in the brain at these moments of peak spiritual experience. And that was like they located this one area that deals with like spatial orientation, and it shuts off when you're reporting that you're like, most spiritually attuned. And I thought that was incredible that there was a piece of matter of cells that had something to do maybe with that feeling. And it was my first dose of like, wow, the brain is this huge world to explore, where anything you're interested in, you can start to look at the brain and see how is it involved. And I started studying in college and everything. And this is in the beginning of the film a bit, but I graduated and I made my first documentary film. And I thought, well, how would you ever make a documentary about this thing I'm so interested in, neuroscience? It seems like this sprawling scientific field. There's huge, long research attempts, and there's not really like new stuff coming out every year that's shocking or transformational, that would make for a salacious story. So I just heard about this guy, Henry Markram, who had declared that he was going to do something in a certain time period. And for neuroscience, for any scientific field, like planting a flag on a certain amount of time you're going to know something is a big claim. And his was the biggest in neuroscience for sure. So I thought, why not just like try to match his crazy timeline with my own, making a film, not knowing anywhere or anything that anywhere would go over those 10 years.
And that's also, this is a film a little bit that shows us a little bit about your brain and how it works, but also a little bit about how Henry Mackram's brain worked. And in a way, it's like a tour de force between like this visionary, slash, I don't know, venture capitalist, because like a lot of what's happening in the project ends up turning that way in terms of like what happens to science and, the corporative parts of it, which I really appreciated in the film too, because it's a huge subject and it's oftentimes never spoken about. Um, so how was it gaining his trust and like having the possibility of being there for the highs and lows of all the project? And I won't say anything just in case somebody's watching the Q&A before watching the film, but like, how did you, how did you build a rapport with him and he could trust you enough to make a film about this project with like a lot of the difficulties and obstacles and dramas that it involved?
Yeah. Well, I have to say first that, I spoke about what I was interested in, why I had my nerdy interest in the field, and saw what Henry was about to do and when made the film. But that person, that version of myself is very different than where I am now. I started when I was 22 and I was just out of college, and I had that 22-year-old awestruck energy about the world that I think is great, but it's certainly different than the 32-year-old energy that I found myself with at the end of the film. And I think that is captured in this arc of the film. But
We literally see you grow.
yeah, it's true. But yeah, that energy coming at Henry Markram with the vision of making a film about his journey, I think it struck him as an opportunity to be seen, as it does for a lot of subjects of documentaries who do believe that they're doing important work. I was someone who was proposing that I would capture the whole journey, not just do a story right now, but really stick with it. And secondly, I had already started doing some work in the field. I was blogging about neuroscience. I had a website. I had done some short video work with some other neuroscientists who recommended me to Henry. When I had trouble getting in touch with him at first, one other neuroscientist emailed him and vouched for me. And so I had some cred going in. I wasn't, coming in from the outside thinking Henry was creating Frankenstein or something, which I think a lot of people were initially going at him with. I was clearly had a nerdy interest in the field. I knew some of the science. I had read his papers, and so I think the trust was, that helped gain trust because I was coming from an earnest place.
But then throughout the years, as he, this huge money European award is awarded to the project, and it goes, more scientists get involved, then some scientists split up in the middle, and there's a division of kind of ultimate goals. And there's some moments where you also embrace the criticism, around his own figure as a more messianic kind of scientist. And but about around the not the legitimacy, because I think it's very clear that it's perfectly legitimate, but um, the ultimate need for this kind of model. And then you raise some deeply philosophical questions that are brilliant. It's so who gets to decide what is a normal brain, or who gets to decide what's the model for perfection, and why should we replicate that kind of model? So in a way, I think he was also in a vulnerable position, because if you had the agency to tell whichever story you wanted to tell, you do give us access to some of the vulnerabilities of his own person and of the project itself. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, you raised great points. I mean, I think that it wasn't always easy for him to realize that there was the same film being made. That all the gusto that the project started with, and when I was first there capturing it, closer to when he gave he gives this TED talk, and closer to that moment, it was easier to kind of just let this film roll with what the milestones would be imagined to be over the decade. But as we got into the decade, 3 years in, 5 years in, and some of this started to happen that you're mentioning, I don't want to give away too much, but there is obviously there are ups and downs, and people may have even seen in the news over the years, big moments of criticism and so forth. But I continued to return, but something key that shifted for me is the first 5 years, I was posting little updates every year online, and Scientific American would host one, or another Vice would host one, and so I was trying to sort of get the word out there that I was making a documentary film about this and stake out the ground a little bit. I stopped doing that after about year 5, when a lot of the criticism happened, because it angered some people over there in the project. My last update that I posted was reflecting that criticism, and the film becomes a bit of a mirror, and by being a mirror on unpleasant things that were going on inside the project and outside, it started to, I think, hit home a little bit that this film was going to not necessarily toe the party line and toe the PR line of the project itself, but was an independent film. And that realization, I had to stand firm in my independence and make it clear that this was, I wasn't interested in continuing if I didn't have an independent position. And so that there were friction points with the project, and there continue to be. This is not, I don't think this is an easy film all the way through for them to watch.
To that extent, have they seen it? And
they have seen it, yeah.
And what has been the reaction?
It's not great.
Oh wow, really?
I wish that we could have had more of an understanding that I was doing an independent film, but I think it was surprising for them potentially to sees the inclusion of a lot of the criticism that I did in the film. And by the way, it's not, it's interesting. I have a 3-person scientific panel that's advising this film, has advised the film through post-production. So 3 independent outside scientists. And, I wanted to get a real take on what they thought was this film fair, unfair towards this project, towards Henry Markram. And 2 out of the 3 scientists on that panel said I wasn't going hard enough on on the project and on Henry and in certain moments. And
sorry.
And so and then I hear obviously they might not agree with that assessment, and so it's an interesting position I've been in with them through the 10 years, and it continues.
Something that I think really helps to walk the story is to walk the story with you. Like the fact that you made a decision at some point of introducing yourself as this person that, we see you on screen as things get more difficult to access and people like start not showing up. And we also navigate with you how difficult it is sometimes to interpret, scientific papers or scientific criticism. And, there's a point in the film where you say something along the lines of like, when I talk to Henry, I really understand where he's coming from and I'm like on his side. When I talk to some other people that have certain criticism and I read what they really are saying, I'm also feeling like I'm in their side. And in today's, current political climate, with like, we oftentimes like see that there is sometimes agendas and biases, behind certain scientific quests and why certain scientific quests are given more space and certain criticism is kind of like pushed out of the limelight. So in a way, I think the fact that that we follow you on this process of like self-doubt and like doubt of like what it is really going on, it's really useful because we should kind of like all adopt that kind of attitude when we're reading anything, even if it's like a peer-reviewed scientific paper. So I think in a way you're giving us a tool to deal with this kind of like impenetrable, scientific information that sometimes gets thrown at us, and
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think the film is trying to show that there is maybe no such thing as the objective, monolithic, neutral scientific good, and that it's all anything scientific is just automatically good, and we should be doing it. It's messy and it's human, and there's a lot of salesmanship that goes into getting science funded, but then that can also pull things into a territory of over promising a bit, which it's interesting now that this project, the Human Brain Project, that this film chronicles, which kind of sprouts up from Henry Markram's original Blue Brain Project, was one of these European flagships that got €1 billion. And since then, the European did, I think, 2 more flagships. They've discontinued the program of awarding these big science projects. And, there's speculation in large part it's because these projects have not been the transformational, output that perhaps was promised at the beginning. And that's something to really look at. That means there's going to be less funding potentially now for science because of potentially some of the promises that were made up front. So these have the level of salesmanship inside of science and those messy human qualities have real repercussions on potentially science for good continuing. And I think that this film hopefully brings that, as you're saying, into question a little bit, that we can have a critical, framework for assessing what's good and bad within science, and also that criticism within science is to be embraced and looked at, and not just as a partisan political attack.
At what point you mentioned that the Department of Defense was really into having like a brain interface, and I was like, what does this mean? Why would they use it for? Like, is this like a tell sign that maybe we should look at this with like, more carefully? You could have gone more deeply into that, but I think you did a really good job at staying with the project because there were so many issues that come, horizontally into your 10-year process.
Yeah.
But you like were like focused, like it's like I'm following this thing and this thing alone. while raising some flags. So what was like the most challenging, just to finish the Q&A because we're coming to an end, what was the challenging part in terms of like keeping things out of the film that you would have liked to include, or maybe like if you were to do the film all over again, that you would have embraced?
Yeah, that was, I mean, this is a 10-year film with footage shot every year. And the impulse for me a lot of the time was to try to include things that were going on over that decade in the film itself to make to keep rolling the film into this like film about a decade in addition to this project. And I had to fight against that a little bit while still letting in some pieces like you mentioned, like DARPA funding half of the US Brain Initiative for one. I got very interested in this issue of identity around a brain simulation. And so I tried to really listen to my gut on what was most interesting to me and to touch on something without getting fully into it, you know, the relationship between Silicon Valley and the promises of a project like the Blue Brain Project and the way Henry Martin presented the project was interesting to me. And I think we've seen also in this decade a fallout in terms of the public's view of Silicon Valley and some of the promises that were made there. So that I wanted to touch on that, but I just couldn't make this film about that. So I had to, as you say, stay focused on this story and the story of the film. And I hope that what I did touch at least, you know, make some links in people's minds between things that they've seen criticism of or discussion of elsewhere and a field that they might have no idea about, like this rarefied, nerdy neuroscience sphere with its own political infighting and everything. So I just wanted to bring in some threads to that world without being able to fully, you know, expand those threads.
Well, thank you so much. You've done a brilliant job. It was a pleasure to watch and to learn with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I really appreciate it.